Hi, I'm Phil Koopman. I'm a professor at Carnegie Mellon University. I have been working on self-driving car safety for 25 years. And in those 25 years, we've seen it go from a graduate student crazy experiment to impressive capabilities in public deployments. And you've all heard all the great promises, which largely remain promises, but we're hopeful. I'm here to give some sort of reality check for policy decisions, because it's important to make policy decisions based on the truth of where we really are. It's okay to look at the promise, but you have to also look at the reality. And so I have 7 slides, 10 minutes. I'm going to go over some of the highlights here. First, the question is, are robotaxis safer? We've all heard these companies say, oh yeah, robotaxis are safer. The proof is in. We have our studies. That's not really where we are. There are some studies that show promising results on crashes, mostly property damage crashes, some very early studies on injury crashes, but they only count some of the injuries, not all the injuries. So it's very preliminary information. But the companies are selling on reducing fatalities, and we're nowhere near ready to know how that's really going to turn out. Now, why is this? Well, in general, in the US and also San Francisco data looks pretty close. Fatalities are about a once every 100 million mile kind of thing for human drivers, and that includes all the drunks. It includes all the distracted drivers. So if you're not drunk, you're not distracted, you can do a lot better than that. That's a lot of miles. And each company, as we heard earlier, has about 5 million miles. So we're 95 more million to go before you're even close to knowing how this turns out. And the point is, we don't know how it turns out. The studies that I mentioned have a lot of assumptions. We just don't know. Now, what's the issue here? Well, from a policy point of view, if you read the headlines, what you have is, by analogy, you're running a 26-mile marathon, a mile and a half in, you go, oh, look, my split times look really good. I'm going to give myself the gold medal. Well, that's what seems to be going on, but that doesn't make sense. We don't know yet. From a policy point of view, this is a little nuanced. What it means is you should not make policy decisions based on an assumption they will be safer. Rather, you should make policy decisions not knowing how the safety is going to turn out. That's a really important point. Next, one of the reasons that it's not clear how this is going to turn out is that robotaxis make mistakes. There's more to safety than a lot of sensors. So in the early days, people would say, there's no way that this thing's going to hit a big object in the road. It's not going to run into a bus because we have LiDARs, we have cameras, we have radars, we have all these sensors. It's going to see the bus and won't hit it. And yet, we saw in San Francisco, it did run into a bus. Well, how did that happen? Well, between the sensors and the wheels moving and the steering happening, there's a lot of computer software. And software is not perfect, especially if you're not following safety standards. It's hard to know where all the bugs are going to be. And this is a bug that resulted in collision. Fortunately, no one was hurt, but it might not have turned out that way. So these things are going to have defects. People used to say they wouldn't fail the way humans do, but in fact, a lot of the pictures you saw are exactly the kind of mistakes people make as well. These things will fail just like humans fail, even if it's for different reasons. And so we need to figure out how that balance is going to turn out. And another related thing you hear is, oh, we have so many rides that were flawlessly, and almost every interaction with the fire truck, we yielded to the fire truck and so on. Safety isn't about the good days, it's about the bad days. If you have one fatality per 100 million miles, you can go 90 million miles, and those aren't the ones that matter. It's the one bad mile that matters. So when you listen to the stories and the experiences, from a safety point of view, it's how often the bad days happen that matter, not the number of good days they happen to have. Important perspective to keep in mind. Next, I want to go down a quick list of overstated claims. So these are talking points from the industry in general, not necessarily the companies who are operating in San Francisco, but the industry in general tends to say these kind of things, and it's important to know where the reality is. They'll say, well, human drivers are terrible, therefore computers will be perfect, and I already discussed that. They'll also trot out this number, 94% of crashes due to human error. The NHTSA study doesn't actually say that. That's a misstatement of what the study says. Yes, it is true that humans are imperfect, but they're really remarkably good at avoiding the worst crashes, especially if they're not drunk and they're not distracted. They're really quite good. We'd like them to be better. I'd certainly love the number of fatalities go down. But on an objective basis, it's really hard to be as good as a human driver. And computers have different failures. They lack common sense. Every time they see something they're not expecting, if they haven't been trained, the technology doesn't know what to do. That's how this technology works. It works on training, and something novel is always an issue. they're going to make mistakes as well because they have software and because they have problems with novelty. So we don't know how this is going to turn out. Next, we have 5 million miles of testing. Well, that sounds really impressive. 95 more million to go, and that includes the drunks. So we have a long road ahead of us. The big numbers are only a start. They're not the end. Now, another one I haven't hit on yet is we follow best practices. They'll say how safety is number one, and they spend a lot of engineering effort and so on. And for some of the companies, it is pretty clear to me that's true. For some of the companies, there's more of a question mark. And the reason I say this is we have opacity. We don't actually know how good their engineering is. We just see what the outcomes are. And a key part of this, I've done safety design reviews across many industries. I've worked on aviation, I've worked on building systems, I worked on chemical processing, I worked on rail, I've worked on a lot of stuff. And in all these industries, they follow their own safety standards. People in the industry who knows what's what, they write a safety standard and the industry follows it. The car companies don't do that. There are safety standards for this technology and the companies are not following them. They won't say they're following them, and it's pretty obvious in some cases they for sure are not following them. And so we don't know how this is going to turn out, and they're not even following their own good practices. That sounds like a problem to me. Finally, they'll argue that future net risk improvement justifies taking chances. They'll say basically, yeah, we had a small crash, but we're going to fix it, and we're busy saving lives here, so give us some slack. Well, we don't know how the saving lives part is going to turn out. I certainly hope they do, but we don't know how long that's going to take. Is it going to be 1 year, 5, 10, 20? We don't know. Meanwhile, what I would recommend is that policies should not be based on, for sure we're saving lives, so it's okay to have a bunch of harm now. I think that's the wrong idea. I think you should base a no harm deployment strategy. First, do no harm as you're deploying this technology, and then you'll get the benefits in due course because no one knows how long that will take. There's regulation. Now, one thing you'll hear is the federal government says that they've certified this technology, and it doesn't necessarily mean what you think. The federal regulations have nothing to do with the safety of the computer driver. They have to do with the airbags and the headlights and what happens if there's no steering wheel, how do we test the airbags and the headlights and other things. And that's important, and it absolutely should happen. But it says nothing at all about the safety of the actual automated driving function. What the feds do is they wait for crashes or reports of bad things, and then they initiate investigations and recalls. So the fact that the feds allow this technology on the road is not predictive of eventual safety. The same with the state. The state will issue driver's license based on not having had crashes during testing and having insurance. But again, both the feds and the states are saying, yeah, these companies self-certify that they're doing whatever they think makes sense, they're putting out on the road, and we're going to keep an eye out and see how it turns out. So you cannot count on the companies having independent supervision for safety. They're going to do what they're going to do in the face of all the financial and other incentives they face. In terms of societal benefit, it's important to realize that the benefits accrue only after the automated vehicles are safe, reliable, and trusted, and we have a lot more work to go on those. Getting it to work going down the street most of the time is incredibly impressive. It's taken 25 years or more, but there's still a lot more to be done to get the safe and reliable going. One of the trade-offs you're seeing is they'll stop a vehicle because they're worried about safety, and okay, fair enough. I'd rather have it stopped than not if you're worried about safety, but leaving it there for minutes or tens of minutes or maybe even hours is a problem because that affects public safety. So they should be able to take these things and pull them out to the side of the road as well as a human driver would have done in that circumstance if you really want to be out on the road in public traffic. If you're going to say we're going to get societal benefit, so we should promote this technology, it's fair to ask what benefit you'll get when. Not only improve safety on some timeline, okay, that's great. We certainly hope that will happen, but what about things like accessibility and equity? We saw California PUC sold on those topics, but we didn't see a requirement for the companies to actually deliver. And I'm aware there's a wheelchair accessible prototype, but when will that deploy? And will there be enough vehicles to make a difference? If the regulators want to see the benefits, they're going to have to require them for the businesses to spend the resources doing that. Promises are nice, but a requirement is better. Also, what about public costs? What public costs are going to be right now? And I'm not going to go over these in detail. We've heard about these, but there are some things that are going to happen in the near term that are costs, and you have to make sure that the promised benefits that will happen someday will get you there. So my last slide, my recommendations to the city: require outcome-based metrics. It's important that fatalities not be the centerpiece. No fatalities for multiple years is table stakes. The numbers as such is it's nowhere near time for fatality. It just shouldn't happen. Let's move on and talk about the other things because that's table stakes. There should be reports of injuries, crashes, road rule violations, emergency responder disruption, things like this. They have to be given to the city for the city to perform its function of managing its roadways. And right now, the car companies, the automated vehicle companies are trying to be as opaque as possible. And a lot of these things, as you heard, are not being reported. They need to be reported so we can understand the impact of this technology on the city to operate. Finally, safety and trust come from transparency. The technology is not going to succeed without public trust, and we're not doing very well on that right now. I think that good, transparent metrics from the cities that have been independently vetted will actually go a long way to giving these companies the trust they need and ultimately helping with the success of the technology. Thank you for considering my comments.